Hello and welcome to Unraveling. I'm Martha of Wild Spruce Knits, and this is episode 1 of the Unraveling Podcast. What kind of podcast is this? I'm not exactly sure yet. Is that bad for marketing? Probably. Do I care? Not at all. So here we are. You'll have to excuse my voice. This is not what I usually sound like. I'm dealing with the whatever early winter back to school crud has gone around to everybody. So I'll try not to cough too much during this. And if I do, I will try my best to edit this out. I'm sitting here drinking tea in my I prefer dogs over people mug. I don't usually drink tea, but it's chilly in my office and I'm not ready for second coffee yet. But if I could only drink one beverage for the rest of my life, it would be coffee. So who am I? Why do you care what I have to say? As I said, I'm Martha and I'm a knitter. I started my knitting business, Wild Spruce Knits, last year in October. I don't know exactly when. Clearly, I don't care about business birthdays because I don't remember exactly when I started it. I think it was sometime last week, a year ago. I've been knitting for a very long time and I just decided, I'll talk more about this later, but I just decided that I needed a creative outlet. So I started a knitting business. I'm also a nurse practitioner. I am currently working in aesthetics and doing some like short-term assignments in various places around the state. I live in Alaska. I live in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm also an outdoor adventurer. I love being in the outdoors. I like running and hiking and skiing and picking berries and just being outside. We're currently in, it's not technically shoulder season anymore because it's snowed and frozen, but we don't have a lot of snow. So we're in that weird, we call it shoulder season, that weird transition between summer activities and winter activities. Some of the lakes are frozen, so people are able to skate. I haven't been out yet, but I would like to go soon. And there's not a lot of snow yet, which makes skating on some of the lakes around town and around the area much easier. But we're in the awkward in-between phase of seasons, which is always a little bit of a challenge. So here we are. Other things about me, my house is always a mess. That's just who I am. I would rather be doing pretty much anything else than cleaning my house. So it's just always a mess. I have 2 dogs. If you follow me on Instagram, you see them a lot. They are prominently featured on my Instagram because they're adorable and I love them very much. Hopefully they don't bark too much during this. Usually they're pretty good. I also have a significant other who lives with me. Yeah, I've lived here my whole life. I went to school for 4 years after high school. I went to college for 4 years after high school in Seattle, but otherwise I came back here and I keep talking about leaving and I just don't. So here I am. So why am I doing this? The original idea for this podcast, the original name idea for this podcast was going to be Martha Talks About Stuff because I just wanted a space to create long form content. I really enjoy the connection and community that exists on like Instagram. I've met a lot of wonderful people on Instagram. I like connecting with people there, but I don't like creating content for Instagram. It is short form content. I'm not clever enough to make it interesting. And I just don't like it. So I needed a place to talk about other stuff. Probably talk about the same stuff that I talk about on Instagram, but in a way that has more context and exists for longer, is easier to find for longer. So I don't like making short form content, but what I can do is sit down and talk about absolutely nothing for a very long time. And from a business perspective, I like to see and get to know the people behind the small businesses that I order from or that I purchase from. I think that that's the beauty of small business is there's a real live human. I mean, there's real live humans behind all businesses, but big businesses, huge businesses, corporations, the that personal aspect is not quite there in the same way that a small business is. Oftentimes it's just one person behind the business, such as in this case, it's just me behind the business. So I am the business. And I like to get to know other people who are the business or behind small businesses. And Instagram does accomplish this behind the scenes connection bit a little bit. But I still think that it's really superficial because you're forced to make the content into bite-sized pieces and they only last for a very short time and they often lack context because you're creating bite-sized content. So that's why I feel like it's valuable to have a podcast about a random assortment of things that may not all be directly related to my business and what I do. I crowdsourced some podcast name ideas from a business group that I'm a member of, and someone suggested Unraveling since it is loosely knitting related and would still make sense when I talk about whatever other random things I'm going to talk about. So that is the name that stuck. Will I talk about knitting? Yes, but I mean, because it's my business. So I will talk about that. That is not the main goal or topic of this podcast. What is the main goal or topic? I don't know. I will figure that out. It's whatever I feel like talking about. But one of my biggest pet peeves about almost every single knitting and knitting adjacent podcast is that they all follow this really similar format of here's what I'm working on, here's what I finished, here's what I purchased, like here's the yarn that I purchased this week or since the last time I podcasted, and here's why I chose this yarn for this project. And I find a few of those interesting, but I really find that it's the person behind the content that is interesting to me. The ones that I like the person, and it's not so much the fact that they're talking about their knitting. I usually like their knitting too, but I like the person that's doing the podcast more so than I care about the actual like knitting content of their podcast. So my hot take is that those kinds of podcasts are just not that interesting. They are all very, very similar in their format, and I just don't like that. So I'm creating my own thing. Like I said, I will probably talk about knitting occasionally because it is a huge part of what I do. But I will not be following the format like everybody else follows with the weekly or however often they podcast. You know, here's what I made, here's what I finished, here's what I'm working on. I'm not going to do that. There is a video version of this podcast. So if you are watching the video version, hi, hello. I will probably, again, occasionally share some things that are coming to the shop. Maybe some of, if I get a lot of questions about the fit or certain things, I might share that on the video version. But I'm going to do my best to remember to cut those out of the audio version because I listen to a fair number of bigger podcasts that have both a video and an audio version. And sometimes they talk about things that you can see on the video version, but you cannot see on the audio version. And they say, if you're listening on the audio, you can check out what we're talking about on the video version. Or, they try to describe what they're talking about that you can see on the video version. And I just don't think that that's very interesting. It's frustrating. Most of these podcasts I know it's not just one person, they have a team, and it wouldn't take that much effort to cut some of that out of the audio version. So I am going to do my best to remember to cut out the parts that are only pertinent to the video version. I'm going to try my best to remember to cut those out for the audio version. And maybe down the road, if one of the versions does significantly better than the other, I will only have one version. I don't know. This is all an experiment. As I said, I'm just it's something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time. So I figured rather than overthinking it as I tend to do and not doing anything, I would just dive in and see how it goes. You're never going to know what works if you don't try it. So I'll do my best to remember to cut the video heavy, the parts that make sense only when you're watching the video. I will do my best to remember to cut those out of the audio version so it's not boring for those of you who are listening on audio. I tend to not consume a lot of video podcasts or a lot of videos in general. I am an audio podcast person. I like to listen to them while I'm driving, while I'm falling asleep, sometimes while I'm knitting. So that's why I didn't want to have just a video version, because I do think that audio podcasts, I like them. I like the people behind them. I want to spend time with those people every week. So I like listening to them. So I don't want to, it is not my job to decide how you consume my content. It is my job to provide different ways for you to consume my content, and you consume it in the way that is easiest and fits best into your life. And if that changes, if sometimes you watch the video and sometimes you listen to the audio, that's fine too. You do what works for you. And if you have thoughts on this one way or another, please let me know, because I would be curious how other people feel about these things. Like everything that we as humans do that's creative, I'm sure this will evolve over time. So I don't want to make too many plans or promises, because who knows what's going to happen down the road. I don't know what's going to happen down the road. So I don't want to promise you things or make too many plans and have those not be able to follow through on that. So for this first episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about who I am and how I got here, because a nurse practitioner who works in aesthetics and has a knitting business might seem a little odd to some people. So I wanted to talk about how I got to this point. So the two most important things to keep in mind when I'm telling this story about how I got here is my grandma taught me how to knit when I was a little kid, and I was probably 8, maybe a little bit younger. I know she taught me how to knit. And then I stopped knitting. I didn't knit for a little while, and then I forgot, and then she taught me again. So we're going to say 8, because it was probably a little bit before and a little bit after that, but I don't remember exactly, because that was a very long time ago. So number 2 is that I have spent a lot of time being a nurse and a nurse practitioner and doing things to learn what I do and don't want, which is why it sounds like I've worked pretty much everywhere. I've been a nurse since 2009, and I became a nurse practitioner in 2016. So I've been doing this for quite a while, and I've learned a lot about what I do and don't like. And something that is very important to me, which I will probably talk about in another episode, is that I'm not really interested in doing things that I don't want to do. That is just my personality. I'm stubborn, and if I don't like doing something, I'm not going to do it. So that's why my professional career has been sounds like it's been all over the place, because I have learned so much about what I do and don't like, and figuring out how to fit that in to a life that I want to live has been really important. So the short version of what we'll call my professional career is that I worked as a labor and delivery nurse, straight out of nursing school for just over 5 years. And then I went back to school to become a nurse practitioner. About that same time, I decided that I was done working in the hospital, which was really kind of the first big step in, I don't have to do the same thing forever. I loved my job as labor and delivery nurse until I just one day was like, I don't want to do this anymore. There was a lot of changes that happened in the hospital that I was working at, and it just stopped being enjoyable. I also got to a point where I felt pretty comfortable with what I was doing, which made it not exciting is the wrong word. I felt it became a little bit more monotonous, because I was very comfortable in doing the things that I was doing. I didn't see a lot of new stuff, which is kind of what keeps you on your toes when you work in medicine a little bit. So I just decided that I was done working at the hospital, and that sort of set in motion if I don't like something, I can change it as far as my career goes. So I did a short stint as a nurse in a primary care clinic. And then because of school and clinicals, I ended up working part-time in a surgery center for most of the, probably 2 years, most of the time that I was in school. As a nurse practitioner, I've worked in women's health, I've worked in functional medicine, I've worked in primary care with some urgent care, I've done pain management and regenerative medicine, as well as some physical medicine. So again, while doing all of these things, I learned what I really do like and what I really don't like. I am talking about this now, this is not surprising. I like more procedure-y things. I really liked being in the OR when I was a nurse in the hospital. What I learned about myself as a nurse practitioner is that I really enjoy sticking needles in people, and that I would really rather have several random part-time jobs than work a full-time 5-day week job. So that is what I have created for myself. I did I did trigger point injections almost exclusively for a couple of years before I started working in aesthetics. And then a chiropractor who I had worked with previously, he approached me about being the medical director at a med spa and chiropractic clinic that he was opening here in Anchorage. And I never thought that aesthetics would be something that I was going to be into. I said yes to the opportunity because the work atmosphere was what I wanted. Part-time, flexible. This is somebody that I worked with before, and we had kind of an agreement about my work schedule. And so that was more important to me than the content of the work. But it turned out to be a really amazing fit because it incorporates sticking needles into people, which I really like. And it has a more creative aspect to the work, which I also really like. So it has been an absolutely wonderful fit. And I was really surprised that I enjoyed it so much. This summer, I started yet another new thing. Things slowed down in the clinic a little bit. This is super common in Alaska. If you live here, you know that the kids get out of school. We end up with this endless daylight, and everybody stops being able to commit to things. Nobody goes to their doctor's appointments. Nobody wants to make plans. Everybody just is like, I'm here. The weather's good. I'm going to go outside. So things really slow down in the clinic, which again, totally expected. It happens almost everywhere across the state that things just slow down in the summertime. Some places close for the summer, not any like medical clinics, but some businesses are only open in the winter or they shorten their hours in the summer. It just kind of depends. So I had the opportunity to take what's called a locums assignment. And that's just a like short-term contract work. Sometimes it's like fill in covering for another medical provider somewhere else. So I went to a fish plant in Valdez to cover their little medical clinic, which I split with another provider. So I was just down there for a couple weeks at a time, which worked out great with working and seeing patients in town. And it was a fun experience. It was very different than what I was expecting. But the best part about it was that it was super short term. So I knew that if I didn't like it, it didn't matter because I didn't have to be there for very long. And it was just a really fun opportunity to get out and work in a little bit of a different setting and see different things and just do something different. So I actually really am looking forward to doing more of that as my schedule allows. The company that I worked with, usually you work with like a staffing agency or something. The company that I work with is really great. And they were really happy to have somebody who is interested in super short-term opportunities. So I'm excited about that. As I said earlier, just before I started working at the med spa last year, I started Wild Spruce Knits because I was looking for a creative outlet after getting really frustrated with the online business that I had in the health space for many years. It just was, I don't know, it was a lot of things, mostly that trying to make health information interesting to people was good health information. So like legitimate health information, interesting so that people would consume it was difficult, and people were more likely to consume not reliable or not trustworthy information. And that got really frustrating for me. And I am not one to promote quitting things. I didn't officially quit it. I was like, okay, I'm going to start this new thing, see how this goes, and I can come back to this other thing if I like it. I haven't gone back to it. It's been a year. I think I can't remember when my like the website for that business expires, but I think it's in February, and I think I'm going to just let all of it expire because I have no need to go back to that because I'm very happy with. It doesn't mean that maybe I won't go back to it in 5 years. I'll probably regret that, but I'm pretty content with the way things are going now. So anyway, so I started Wild Spruce Knits because I needed a creative outlet, and I don't necessarily recommend monetizing your hobbies. That's not for everyone. In this case, it really worked out for me, and I can't explain to you why. It might be my personality. I always create projects for myself. Like even if I could never not work in some capacity just because I'm always doing some sort of project that would seem like work to some people. So I don't necessarily, it's monetizing your hobbies is not for everybody. In this case, I actually think that it's actually made me like my hobby more. There are parts of running a business, especially being the only person running a business, that are absolutely terrible and I absolutely despise them. But that doesn't take away from the parts that I do really like. So the actual like knitting and creating part of this business it's wonderful. And actually creating a business around it has allowed me to have more freedom with this hobby. It's hard to explain. I don't know, but sometimes working within constraints when you're doing creative work, working within constraints can make things better. So, somebody requests a custom project and they say, okay, I'd like, a pair of mittens and these are the colors that I'm thinking. So I typically go to the local yarn store, which is not the most cost-effective way to do it. But if I'm ordering, or if I'm not ordering like a large quantity, it makes the most sense and it's the most quickly accessible way to get yarn. And I need to like touch it and see it in person for the most part. So I can go to the yarn store and with those constraints, the colors and the general pattern idea, I can try to see what I can come up with within those constraints. And that's fun. It's like a fun challenge. So monetizing your hobbies, totally not for everybody. In this case, it's worked out for me. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been knitting for a very long time. I worked at a yarn store in college. So it's not like one day I was just like, hey, I'm going to start a knitting business with no idea what I was getting myself into. I've knit gifts for people as long as I've been knitting. I've knit for myself. Like I have been doing this for a long time. So I knew what I was getting myself into and I was confident enough in my abilities to figure that I could make it work. There are plenty of knitters out there or people who have businesses that are related to knitting who are pretty new knitters. So it doesn't, just because I've been knitting forever doesn't mean that I am more or less qualified to do this job. It just meant that I had confidence in my ability to, I knew where my limits were. So it was easy for me to say like, yes, I can do that or no, I cannot do that. I'd just been following some knitters on Instagram. And one day I was like, I'm just going to try this. So almost a year later, or just over a year later, I am super glad that I took the chance. It's been a really fun thing to do. And it's been fun to make plans and have this business grow. So here we are, knitting nurse practitioner with a podcast that is only sort of relevant to any of those things. I had a podcast for my health business that I really enjoyed creating. But as I said before, none of the knitting or even like craft related podcasts were something that I found that I enjoyed. So I was like, I'm not going to create just a knitting podcast. So I'm making something up as I go because that's kind of how I do things. So that's how we got here. Wild Spruce Knits, I'll probably do some like shop update talk at the end of the episode, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to put it at the end of the episode here and see how that goes. So Wild Spruce Knits, you can find me at wildspruceknits.com. I will link all of my social media, websites, email, everything in the show notes or the video description, depending on where you're watching this. So you can find links for that. My shop right now is pretty well stocked. There are only a couple things that are out of stock. I'm preparing for a local market here on November 19th, I think. So if you're local to me, I will be at a market at Odd Man Rush Brewery in Eagle River on November 19th. And so my shop is pretty well stocked. I'm also making more things for the market. So if you don't see something that you like, or something, if you see something and it's sold out, feel free to reach out to me too. I do custom orders. Um, I have a limited capacity for that depending on the time of year. Right now, this is the busy time of year because it's winter, so people want their knitted items. It is the holidays, so people are buying gifts for their friends and family. So things in late November tend to get a little crazy. So if you see something that you would like, or you have a request for a custom project, please reach out to me because I will be able to tell you, yes, I can do that. No, I can't do that. Or say, I have a list of I have somebody who asked me about doing a project for her. And I was like, I will be able to get to it after Christmas for sure. I might be able to get to it sooner. But I would rather under promise and over deliver. So I usually can give you a pretty good idea of when I will have time to get to that. And if that timeline doesn't work for you, that's fine. I don't charge extra for custom projects. If I have to order yarn, sometimes I'll charge like a deposit, just because when I buy, most projects don't require all of the yarn out of a skein or a hank of yarn. So sometimes I'm left with extra yarn, and it's not necessarily something that I would I could use it for other projects, but it's not necessarily something that fits with other projects that I'm doing. So sometimes I will charge, if I have to order yarn that is not something that I will use for other things, I will charge a little bit extra. But so far I've only had to do that once. But just something to be aware of. And it's like $10 extra. So it's not a big deal in most cases for most people. So that's me being, this is why I have podcasts and not talking about this on Instagram, because I am a rambler. So all that to say, the shop is pretty well stocked if you want to check out what I've got. If you're local, come see me at Odd Man Rush in Eagle River on November 19th. There will be tons of other local craft and various other kinds of businesses there. So that should be really fun. You can find my social media, which is mostly Instagram, my website linked in the show notes for this episode or in the description of the video. If you have questions or topics that you want me to cover, send me an email. That'll also be linked in the description for the video or the show notes. Come find me on Instagram, send me a message, reach out. I've got a list of topics going that I've made over the past couple of months, just things people have asked me about, and some hot takes because I have a lot of opinions about things. So I would love to hear if there's anything that you would like me to cover. If you have requests for a custom project or are curious if I can do something, please reach out and let me know. Like I said, I'm happy to give you a timeline. If I can't get to it now, I'm happy to give you a timeline, and no pressure. If that timeline doesn't work for you, I understand. So thanks for being here. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you soon.